You?
Well, not too bad. At least it's not hardly as cold as it was, so that's a positive.
That's very good. Let me just. Are you going to share the presentation or do you want me to share from my side that
I left
presentation?
it up. I left it up to you whether you want to share it or not because I passed the share button to you.
Okay, got it. Let me
I
check.
loaded it. I loaded it to their Canvas folder, so uh, they've got access to it that way.
Okay, let me check. I have it right here. Um, Okay, got it. Um, so I can share the presentation from my side. I have it right here. Just let me
Okay.
share my screen so you can see my presentation.
Okay, I can see it.
Yes, just let me because I want to share only the window with. Okay, got
Okay.
it. So I think can you see the first slides?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, got it. So let me know whenever you want to start.
Whenever, yep, whenever you're ready, they're going to be coming in here. So, but yeah, start whenever you want to take off. We're ready to go.
Okay, got it. Thanks. So how much time do we have until 4?
We've got until 3:45, so an hour and 15
3:45.
minutes.
Okay, got it. Okay, so uh thanks Robert for setting this Zoom meeting. I'm going to give a brief presentation of myself. My name is Carlos Aleman. I am based in Mexico. I am I'm in Aguascalientes. Aguascalientes is a small city between the center of Mexico. We are in the middle between Monterrey, Guadalajara, and Mexico City. If you heard news from the weekend, with all the stuff that happened here in Mexico with violence, all of that happened in Guadalajara, which is pretty close to us. It's just 2 hours from here in Aguascalientes. So we are in the dead center of Mexico. I have been giving classes to undergrad students on the Universidad Panamericana from about 3 years. I am myself, I'm an alumni from there. I studied in Universidad Panamericana. Uh, right now, I have SOFOM. That is the name of the institution or the legal name of the institution. Actually, SOFOM is a financial, it's a non-banking financial institution. Yeah, here in Mexico, it's like a bank but with not the regulation that a bank has. So we have been on the market for about 4 years. Yes, 4 years. We're going to have 4 years in April of this year. And also my expertise, I was fund manager of a private equity fund here in Mexico. I think I I have the record for being the fund manager, the youngest fund manager here in Mexico, from what I have heard from a lot of people here in the industry. So I have a lot of experience on that. I have a lot of experience on cross-border operations. a lot of the businesses that we have on the portfolio of the private equity firm were based also on the US, especially in San Jose, California, because it's Silicon Valley, so it's the most natural way in which a startup can have access to finance in the US. So that's a little bit of my background. The main goal of this class is like that you can have an broader approach of what is the Mexican financial system. You are going to see that we have a lot of common things with the US, and my experience on the industry, on private equity, on the non-banking financial system is that we tend to copy all of the things that you have in the US and tropicalize that things into Mexico, which is it can be in sometimes a little bit hard because it's the legal system is not ready here in Mexico for this kind of adjustments on the laws and on all the figures that you have in the US. So you have it now. You can stop me. We can chat a little bit of about your questions that you have, or if you want to add something to the class, it's also okay. So first of all, well, this is what is the financial system. This I'm not going to be a lot of time on this slide. It's all the institutions that are on the side of the money, that the money on the inflows, on the outflows of the money, the savers, also the financial institutions, for example, the banks. We have we have about 35 banks here in Mexico, and also the non-banking system, which is composed here in Mexico for about 5,000 institutions between credit unions, because I heard on the class of Robert that you have also that, the credit unions, and a lot of other figures that we have here in Mexico. Um, and so, in broader, what is the Mexican financial system, and what are some of the things from the financial system here in Mexico? It we have uh, a pretty basic structure in which we regulate all the Mexican financial institutions. The law here in Mexico gives like this: if you are a financial institution, you have a specific laws from it. We have separated here in Mexico the consumer or all the commercial activities from the financial activities. So here in Mexico, we have all of that structure in a pretty straightforward, regulated structure. We have channel savings into into productive investment. Also, we have credit to individuals and businesses. We also have on the financial system, we have an authority which is going to be the same as the Fed, the Federal Reserve that you have in the US. We have in Mexico, it's called Banjico, Banco de Mexico, which you can translate it to Bank of Mexico. That is the central figure that we have here, the central bank here in Mexico. And also, it is supervised by government authorities to protect users and ensure transparency. And that is a pretty key thing when you try to see the financial system here in Mexico. Here in Mexico, we have the money laundering, which is a pretty big hazard that we have here in Mexico, because we have all these cartels, drug dealers trying to launder their money. So here in Mexico, one of the main keys or the main activities or the main goals is to try to reduce as much as we can the money laundering. It's not as easy as you think. Maybe you have seen, for example, some TV series or movies in which it's pretty easy to launder money. But in here in Mexico, it's a thing that we try to supervise a lot. We try to regulate a lot. For example, from my side, I don't receive any cash. Cash here in Mexico is considered like a pretty big hazard in terms of money laundering. So that is one of the main things that we do here in my business, which is not to receive any kind of cash, all by wire transfer, because it's pretty it is a pretty big hazard that you can take on account. So that is more like the overview of the Mexican financial system. The main authority that we have here in Mexico, we have the Ministry of Finance, which is called here in Mexico Hacienda. Hacienda is also like the uh, standard name for all of the countries in Latin America to call the Ministry of Finance. And it's focused on the fiscal policy, it's focused on taxes, it's focused on collect taxes, on trying to give a budget to all of the entities, to the state governments. In Mexico, I have also noticed that we have a main difference between the fiscal system here in Mexico and the fiscal system in the US. The fiscal system in Mexico is pretty central in a way in which the federal government is the one that collects almost all the taxes. And so what happens here in Mexico is all of the taxes go up to to the federal government, and federal government. What they do is to try to give to first to what we are going to call like state governments, or the yes, like governments, and also the municipalities the money, and they are going to give them that money. So it's a pretty also a pretty hard thing, because here in Mexico, because we have three political parties, four political parties. So that is also an issue that happens, that a lot of the times federal government try to be more gentle with their governments, or the state governments that are aligned with them. So that is a pretty hard thing to here in Mexico, at least, because that policy. And in the US, you can know, as you can see, the fiscal policy is not is not focused on the federal, or not all the money that goes from taxes go to the federal government at first. A lot of the taxes are state taxes, county taxes. That is another big difference that we have here in Mexico compared with the US. Banco of Mexico is the central bank. It's responsible for the monetary policy. Is what you are going to see on the Federal Reserve is the same thing. Uh, in here in Mexico, it only has one main goal in the law, which is to try to stabilize the inflation. The inflation rate, or the inflation goal rate right now, it's I think it's about 3%. If I don't forget, it's 3% right now. We are in the 3.7% annually on inflation. So we are not we don't have a lot of difference between the goal and the actual inflation rate. Banco of Mexico is also it's completely autonomous. It doesn't depend on the president. Is also another important thing. I have seen that there are countries in which it depends directly on the president. So here in Mexico, we have Banco Mexico, Banxico. It has been autonomous since '97. So we have been stable in terms of inflation since that year. We also have CNBB, which in Spanish will be Comisión Nacional Bancaria de Valores. It's the same as the SEC. It's the same thing as the Security Exchange Commission is the same thing. What CNBB does is try to supervise all financial entities that are on the financial markets, that are on Bolsa Mexicana de Valores, which is going to be the similar, or is going to be the same thing as the New York Stock Exchange or the Nasdaq. And also they supervise not only the institutions that are on the market, on the public markets. It also supervises banks, supervises, for example, non-banking financial system. It's like a SEC, but with maybe a broader supervision, because The issue that we have here in Mexico is, for example, I don't know how much or how many companies are on the market in the US. I think are is going to be on the order of 7,000, 8,000. Here in Mexico, we only have 130 companies that are on the stock market. So that's why CNBB is broader because if it all focuses only on the public institutions and public, I mean, that are on the market, that are on the stock market, it's going to be it's not going to be efficient enough. We also have CNSF, which is going to be Comisión Nacional de Seguros y Fianzas, which is going to be all the insurance. Insurance, when you heard seguros is equal to insurance in the US. So that is the entity that regulates insurance and also, well, mainly insurance. So we also have CONSAR. CONSAR is what CONSAR sees is all the pension funds. The in here in Mexico, our retirement system or retirement saving system is based on a figure that we call Afore, which is an acronym for well, I don't remember exactly what is the acronym for, but actually it's for the retirement system. In Mexico, it's more regulated than the US. We only have 10 Afores. I don't know what is the amount of 101K that you have in the US, which I think it's a lot of them. But here in Mexico, we only have 10. So that is another problem that we also have here in Mexico. That is also another explanation of why the stock market is not liquid enough, is not big enough as the one that you have, because here in Mexico the retirement system it's pretty regulated. You only have 10 competitors, so that is another problem. Mexican doesn't save. It's a pretty big issue that we have here in Mexico, and also here in Mexico. In the US is more regulated, but here in Mexico we have an informal market for jobs that are jobs that are not regulated, that they don't have any kind of social security system, that they don't have any kind of transaction on the financial system. It's all paying cash. And that is roughly half of the jobs that we have here in Mexico. So that is a problem that we have with the savings, that there are not a lot of people that save money. And also you have this issue when you overregulate one part of the retirement system, and that doesn't let other competitors to be on the market. What are some of the financial institutions that we have here in Mexico? We have commercial banks, are banks like the ones that you have in the US. Here in Mexico are 35. The biggest one, because the biggest one is the number one by a lot, because by size is the biggest bank here in Mexico. Maybe is the biggest bank in Latin America, which is BBVA. BBVA is actually a bank from Spain. It's not Mexican. The actual headquarters is in Spain, but actually here in Mexico is where almost all the revenue and the profit comes from. So you also have another banks that are not as big as BBVA. You have Banorte, which that is a Mexican bank. I think is from the first five is the only one that is completely Mexican. You also have Santander. Santander is a Spanish bank. You also have HSBC, which you also have in the US. You have it. We also have Banamex, and I mentioned that they have because Banamex was in the group of Citigroup. The thing is that in Mexico they are selling Banamex. Citi is selling Banamex right now. I think they have broad investors, that they have minority position on the cap table, but it is supposed that it is going to sell all of the Banamex business to investors that come from other places. So that are the main banks that we have here in Mexico. And also we have development banks. Here in Mexico is a pretty big part. um the development banks for all the banking system, and also not only the banking system but also to the consumer system or the commercial system that we have. The biggest development bank that we have here in Mexico is Nacional Financiera, is the biggest one. They lend, for example, to financial institutions. They lend at a interest rate close to the funding rate or the funding goal rate. We also have Soform, Sofipo. Soform is the one that I mentioned to you, is like a bank, but we don't have the regulation of a bank. We are close to 3,000. If I remember well, we are on that level. We also have Sofipo. Sofipo is they have more regulation than the Sofoma itself because they can receive deposits from the savers. And we have about, I think it will be on the order of 40, more or less. And you have other financial institutions that are non-banking or non-banks that are allowed, because here in Mexico we have a law that specifies this kind of institution that we have here in Mexico. We also have insurance company as the one, as you know, in the US, and also pension funds. The pension funds is the one that I told you, is the Afores, and we don't have the 101k. Here in Mexico, it's, as I mentioned to you, so regulated the retirement savings system. It's overregulated, it's not efficient enough. And so that is one of the issues. And that issue also hits for the financial markets, the stock market that itself. The financial markets that we have here in Mexico, the money market, we also have the capital market, the money market, all the we call money market here in Mexico. I don't know if that is the same term, but here in Mexico, money market is to the instruments that we have here in Mexico to lend money in a time frame of less of 1 year. That is what we call money market, capital market, all the stock market that we have. We in Mexico have only two stock exchange. The first one is going to be Bolsa Mexicana de Valores. Bolsa Mexicana de Valores is the biggest one. They have 130 companies, I think, and the other one is going to be Viva. Viva is a new one. Viva has about 7 to 8 years. Um, and actually, I think they have that stock market of about 15 companies that are on Viva. And actually, they are the same ones that are on the Bolsa Mexicana de Valores. Here in Mexico, the stock market is pretty small, but if you look at the lending market on the public market, on this, like not in the stock exchange, but the lending to companies going from the public financial market, we have a lot of experience. That is actually what we specialize to try to give the bonds to the companies. We are pretty good at that level. That is the one that Afores look a lot. Uh, we have companies, a lot of companies here in Mexico that go to the market only so they can raise money, but not as a stock, but instead of a loan. And here in Mexico, it's is actually in which we specialize a lot. The derivative markets, it is a small market also. It is not uh, as structured as the one that you have. For example, you have um, a financial market only for that, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Here in Mexico, we have a small market, which is called MEXDER. In reality, MEXDER doesn't operate a lot because here in Mexico, the thing is that we have the problem that not a lot of businessmen know these kind of instruments of securities. They are not used to that one. So that is another issue that we have. The foreign exchange market, we have a lot of forex, if you wanted to call it that way. The thing that happened is that we have a lot of companies here in Mexico that are not Mexican, that are actually, for example, American companies based or that have operations here in Mexico, that have factories here in Mexico. We also have a lot of companies that comes from Japan, Germany, France, Spain, UK, Italy. We have a lot of companies in that kind of operations. So here in Mexico, we do a lot of transactions with with foreign exchange. For example, uh, in here in Mexico, you see a lot of forex involving the US, because for us here in Mexico, one of the indicators of the KPIs, of the economic KPIs that we look a lot is what is the what is the exchange rate between the US and the US dollar and the Mexican peso, because a lot of the operations happen for companies that are outside, and also we tend a lot to go to the US market and try to bring loans from the US or bring capital from the US. So that is also another important thing, that we have a lot of liabilities that are based on US dollars rather than in Mexican pesos because of that. So that happened a lot, and we have seen a lot that one. The role of Bank of Mexico is to be the central bank. The monetary policy, it is regulated from the Bank of Mexico. We what we tend to do a lot is to try to see what you are doing on the Fed. Almost all the time is if you, for example, cut rates of funding or funding goal rates, what we might do on the next board that we are going to have with Banxico, as is that we are going to do the same thing as the US. For example, we are going to cut rates also on the same order. So we tend to try to do that mirror between the US and Mexico. It's a pretty common thing because, as I mentioned to you, the US for us is a pretty big commercial ally, and also not only a commercial ally, but it is also the one that tends to move a lot the economy on the global outcome that you are going to see. Also, the inflation control it's the main goal that we have here in Mexico is 3%, as I mentioned to you. Um, on the last years, as it happened also to you, here in Mexico, we have inflation in the rates of 8%, 7%, 9%, which is not pretty common to see, but that was like the main challenge for the Mexican, for the Bank of Mexico on the last 2, 3 years, on this post-COVID era that we have in terms of monetary policy. Also, the currency stability. Another thing that happens a lot is that um, Mexican peso is not as stable, for example, as US dollar. We have this kind of fluctuations between the exchange rate that happens a lot. The global, or what we try to do is to try to see what is happening with the exchange rate, to try to control that one, because as I mentioned to you, because we have a lot of operations with the US, and if we have this fluctuation on the exchange rate, it can be not an outlier, but instead like a cost that is going to be hitting to the production here in Mexico. Also, not only the production, but also to try to bring capital here in Mexico. For example, if you have here in Mexico American factories, that happens a lot. Uh, you are going to pay in the Mexican factories in pesos a lot of the things that you have in the American factory, but you need to bring the money back to the US. So that is going to be one of the main issues that you are going to see on these kind of fluctuations on the exchange rate. So Bank of Mexico is pretty close, and they watch a lot in terms of the exchange rate, because here in Mexico, the exchange rate that we have with the US dollar is pretty important for us. And it is also an economic signal of what is happening. If we are strong enough, if we can, for example, if we are going to have this outflow of money, inflow of money, and the US dollars, if it is going to be a pretty good in terms of exchange rates. So it involves a lot of things, the exchange rate here in Mexico, that maybe in the US you don't see a lot, because you are, for me, you are the central entity on the economy, on the global economy. But here in Mexico, we need to see what is happening in all of of the world. Um, and well, very quickly, what we have seen from here, that is the perspective that we have here in Mexico. You are by far the most influential economy in the world. Here in Mexico, that is also another issue. For example, when Donald Trump put these tariffs or announced tariffs, here in Mexico happens a lot of things. We have seen, for example, in Mexican factories, that they are not investing anymore here in Mexico, or they try to restrict a lot of the investment, or they are trying to make these reconfigurations to try to get another markets. For example, the Asian market, we are getting closer to the Asian markets since Donald Trump arrived, because of this tariff, because we need to be competitive enough. And for years, we were very strong, and we are also very strong right now because of the US economy and the Mexican economy and that alliance. But also, that is another thing that happens a lot, not only here in Mexico, also in Latin America, and in the rest of the world. Whatever you announce is going to be pretty important for all the economies in the world. You are a pretty highly developed capital market, a pretty strong global currency. You are the center of all the economy. If to the US dollar happen anything, that is going to hit to the to all of the over the world. And also, the institutional investors that you have in the US are have different sizes. You have institutional investors way bigger than the ones that we have here in Mexico. For example, I remember by working in private equity, if we because we tend to do a lot that this strategy, that is to try um, to give the Mexican startups the opportunity to raise money in the US. Because raise money in the US, what it means is that they are going to raise at a higher valuation and also higher tickets than the one that you are going to find here in Mexico. So that is also another important thing, and that is, I think, the outcome of all the laws, the retirement saving system that you have in the US. Also, because you have more appetite, sorry, for risk investments. Here in Mexico, is people don't tend to do a lot of risk investments. It's a difference between the US and here in Mexico, in terms of the investors that you want to find, and what you are going to see. Also, um, well, these are the main authorities. What is, and I'm not trying to focus on this one, because you have already know what are the main authorities in the US, but really what I want to tell to you is what are the institutions that we have here in Mexico that are closer to them. The Federal Reserve is the Bank of Mexico, Banxico. They have maybe the same function. I think the only function or the only goal that is different, that I learned from Robert, from your professor Robert last week, is that you also have the unemployment rate as a goal. Here in Mexico, we don't have any kind of unemployment rate goal. In Mexico, the unemployment is pretty low for our standards. We have unemployment of about 2%, 1.5%. That is the outcome that we have because in Mexico to hire someone is pretty cheap. And also, as I mentioned to you, there is an informal market of, if you wanted to call it that way, a black market for the jobs in which they don't have any kind of social security. They don't have any kind of all the benefits that workers have if they were on the formal market of the jobs. So that is another important thing. And also you have the U.S. Treasury. The U.S. Treasury will be the same as to us as Secretaría de Hacienda y Crédito Público, which is Hacienda, which is the Ministry of Finance. Is they do the same thing, the public debt, the fiscal policy, collect taxes, making budgets for governments, for institutions that they have. The SEC is going to be the same as CNBC, the CNBB, which is Comisión Nacional Bancaria de Valores. The thing is, as I mentioned to you before, is that SEC is more focused on security markets here in Mexico. CNBB is more focused on the financial system at itself as a bigger entity. And it only excludes some institutions, for example, insurance, for example, Afores, which is the retirement saving systems, but the other rest is regulated by the CNBB. So that is a huge difference that we have here in Mexico, and also here in Mexico we resent it because it in sometimes CNBB can be pretty inefficient on treating matters that are urgent to the country. Also the FDIC, we also have another one here in Mexico, which is called IPAB, Instituto de Protección al Ahorro Bancario. It's like the commission that we have that try to protect all the savings on the banking system, only on the banking system. It doesn't apply to other financial institutions. In Mexico, it's not common that that we have these like events of in which liquidity is a problem for the banks. Banks here in Mexico are pretty strong ones. It's pretty uncommon to see a bank close. The last bank that I saw that closed, it was about 10 years ago, more or less. So in Mexico, it's not the same thing because we have a fewer number of banks. That is one way to see it. And also, as happens with the retirement saving systems here in Mexico, the banking system is pretty overregulated. To have a license to operate as a bank, it's pretty expensive. It delays for about, you can have that license if you start right now, maybe in 4 years from now, because it is pretty hard to have a license for banking system. So also naturally what happened is that not a lot of, well, the banks that that have that license are pretty strong banks because they need to invest a lot of money to have that banking license. So that is why we'll have to see that one a lot of times. In the US, I don't remember what is the number of how much is secured by the FDIC, all the bank deposits. Here in Mexico, we are because it's attached to an indicator on an economic indicator, but here in Mexico is close to the 3.5 million in pesos, which will be if you try to make the change with the US, you are talking about 200,000 US dollars, which are secured here in Mexico by the IPAB. And the IPAB also it's important because here in Mexico we had a banking crisis, a pretty big one on the 9040. Yes, it was on the 9040. All the banking system collapsed as a whole. So IPAB was created. IPAP rescued all the banks were rescued by the IPAP. All the loans and the subprime loans, and also the default loan or the loans that were defaulted, and all that securities that the bank had were acquired by Mexican federal government. So that is also one main reason that we have this institution, what is called IPA. Yeah. So I'm going to skip this one because it's like the financial institutions that you have in Mexico, credit unions. Well, just to make a little uh, quick recap. In the US, you have commercial investment banks. Here in Mexico, we don't have a figure that is like an investment bank at itself. We don't have it. It's something that we have tried to develop, but as an investment bank, it doesn't happen here in Mexico. It's not the same thing that as the one that we have here in Mexico. Credit unions, we also have credit unions here in Mexico are different from the US. Well, are different because here in Mexico are for profit. I think in the US are non-profit institution. So in Mexico, they are actually for profit. The thing is that credit unions only give loans, but only for their for the members of the shareholders of that credit union in Mexico. That is the only difference between a SOFOMAS and a credit union. And actually, credit union here in Mexico is pretty obsolete. No one is going after that license. The licenses, it's not it's not agile enough. It's pretty complicated to run a credit union here in Mexico. So a lot of people tend to try not to get these licenses. They are getting the Sofom ones or even the Sofipo ones. Insurance company you also have is the same thing. And pension and investment funds in Mexico, the thing is that we only have pension funds, the one that I mentioned to you, the Afores. We have small funds that have some tax benefits if you invest on them that can be a closer thing to the 101k that you have in the US, but it's not the same thing because it is the only thing is that they have some tax benefits, but actually almost all the regulation is pretty it's pretty different from here in Mexico. So what we have as common things between Mexico and the US, the central bank, it is almost or it has the same goal. Maybe the only goal that we are missing is the unemployment rate because that is not a goal for Banco de Mexico. The regulatory agencies supervising financial institutions. We also have, and if you try to compare like the structure or the regulatory structure between you and us in Mexico, it's pretty similar. We have a lot of the same thing that you have in the US. As I mentioned to you, what we tend to do is to try to bring all the stuff that you have in the US and the regulation that you have in the US, try to bring them to Mexico and try to tropicalize that regulations. So that is why you are going to see this kind of structure, regulatory structure, as closer to the one that you have in the US. The deposit insurance to protect savers, we have it with the PAP. I think the amount that we have covered here in Mexico is smaller than the one that you have in the US. But actually, I think in Mexico, there happen a lot that you have to see banks go bankrupt or have liquidity problems. For example, as the example that you have with Silicon Valley Bank, which I remember pretty good because we had when I was working on the private equity fund, we have four companies with banking accounts in SVB, and that was my first time that I saw a bank going into liquidity problem. Developed financial markets, yes, we have it. Maybe not on the stock market. In the US, sorry, in the lending market, on the loan market, or the bond security market, we are pretty. developed. For if you want to compare us, for example, to the rest of Latin America, we have a lot of advantage because a lot of companies here in Mexico go and try to issue bonds in the market. In the US, it's common to see, for example, a lot of companies go public. Here in Mexico. It happens. It is a national new because it doesn't happen a lot. There are some explanations for why this happens. One of them is the liquidity, because you don't have a lot of competitors on the retirement savings system. You don't have liquidity from them, or the liquidity is very restricted. That is one explanation. The other one is the security itself. If you go public, all your information go public. In here in Mexico, making public your info can be pretty dangerous. It happens a lot that if people know how much you are worth, it can be a hazard. It also depends in which part of Mexico you are. For example, if you are in Mexico City, you are not going to have any kind of issue in terms of security. Guadalajara, the thing that happened on the weekend, it's one thing that happened maybe in 10 years. I haven't, that was the first time that I saw something similar on Guadalajara. Monterrey is also the same thing. Monterrey, for me, is the city that is more close to an American city, or that resembles the most to an American city. So that the issue is that a lot of companies that we have in Mexico are not on these three big cities and in other cities, and also that is a hazard that we have here in Mexico for businessmen. If you want to make your info public, that is one issue that we have. Also in Mexico, if you have, so for example, CNBV, which is the one that is similar to the SEC, they have a lot of tasks. They regulate a lot of companies, and what happens is that because they regulate a lot of companies, they don't have a lot of time to try to at to go with other issues that they have, other tasks that they have, and so the process to go public here in Mexico is pretty slow. You don't have that one. In Mexico, we try to make this issuance of securities by the SPAC modality. In the US was a pretty big hit on the 21, 22, 23. In Mexico, we tried to do something like that, and it was a pretty big failure. It didn't raise 100% of the money that was trying to raise the SPAC. So in Mexico, in general, it's pretty hard to do these things. To try to issue an IPO on the Mexican market is pretty hard. On the last year, it was they made a reform here in Mexico to try to make the issuance of the IPO more faster, uh, to try to reduce a lot of the workflow that we have here in Mexico. But at least right now, I haven't seen someone that has or that take advantage of this reform. But that is the issue that we have here in Mexico compared with the U.S. Mexican market is pretty small compared with the US market. And actually, we have American companies that are that have issuance here in Mexico. For example, one we have, which you can say it's Mexican, but actually from American capital, is Walmart. Walmart in Mexico is one of the biggest companies that we have in terms of employment. And here in Mexico, we have Walmex, which will be the subsidiary for Walmart. Walmex operates all of Mexico. I don't remember also of Central America, but here in Mexico, we have it with, well, Walmart issue stocks on the Mexican market. What happens a lot, and also that is an important thing to mention to you, is that we have a lot of companies that go public, but on the US market. rated than in the Mexican market. One of them, the IPO was, I think, about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, or 4 weeks. No, no, sorry. The issuance of that IPO, I think it was 3 months ago, 4 months ago. It was Aeromexico. Aeromexico is the biggest airline here in Mexico. It went public in the New York Stock Exchange. It was public here in Mexico. I think all the insurance that they have here in Mexico, they take it out from the market, and they went public on the New York Stock Exchange, and that happens a lot. That we have Mexican companies that are on the U.S. market because they try to take advantage of what happening on the financial markets in the US. And because in Mexico, it's pretty more complicated to have an issuance of an IPO. So that is like the similarities that we have between both of us. What are the main difference that we have? The market size. By a lot, you have a market size pretty big if you compare with the Mexican market. For example, the stock market, we only have 130 companies here in Mexico, and from them, you only have the ones that have like this liquidity on the shares on the transactions that are roughly about 25 to 30 that have liquidity enough if you want to try to make investments in a way in which you are going to move the money a lot of in the market. That are the only ones that we have here in Mexico. And also, if you see, for example, the banks are not, they don't have the same size as the size that you have in the US. For example, I think BBVA, the market, well, not the market cap, the assets that are under management for BBVA, I think are on the order of 50 billion. 50 billion for us, it's a lot of money. Maybe in the US, you are talking about a medium bank, not a big bank. We have, and that is explained also because in Mexico, not a lot of people have bank accounts. Here in Mexico, only 50% of Mexican people have bank accounts. And it's quite similar for what is happening on the informal job market. And that is an issue that we have been trying to attack from the past two administrations. We have seen that that is a pretty big challenge that we have here in Mexico. There have been some steps, for me, are baby steps because we are not close enough to try to reduce this gap that we have between the actual market that we have here in Mexico to the formal market that we have here in Mexico. Also, the currency influence, the dollar is the global reserve currency. That is not a secret. Here in Mexico, it happens. It's not common to see, for example, that you make transactions in US dollars. That is not a common thing. That is a common thing in some other underdeveloped countries on Central America and also South America. I have seen that one, for example, in Argentina. Argentina, a lot of the transactions happen in US dollars, even though that they have their own Argentinian pesos. And also, I remember when I went to Colombia. In Colombia, they don't use Colombian pesos a lot. They if you have American dollars, US dollars, they are going to take that American dollars, and that happen a lot. But here in Mexico, almost the transactions happens in Mexican pesos and cash. A lot of the transactions, and we don't have that influence on other currencies that you have, for example, in the US. If something happens on the US in terms of announcement of the central bank of the Federal Reserve, what is going to happen is that it's going to hit to all of the other economies that depend or have ties to you. In Mexico, if we make an announcement, It's going to be a financial new for some of the countries that we have ties to, but not it's not going to be an important issue, for example, in China, in Japan, because they don't depend on the Mexican peso. And also because you have a lot of influence on our economy. I think, if I remember well, I think from the perspective of how much transactions in percentage do we have with the US compared with all of the other exporting transactions or also to the import transactions. We are talking about that 50% of the transactions that we have here in Mexico that are cross-border are with the US. So we have yes, we have been allies from a long time ago, but we also have this issue that we depend a lot in you. That's why when you see that Donald Trump put pressure on on a Mexican president, on whatever Mexican president that we have, they comply almost all the time, or at least they are not aggressive on their response. For example, I have seen what the Canadian president is doing, that is taking like a position of cooperating, but not giving Donald Trump all the advantage that he has. In Mexico, that doesn't happen. So that is an example of what is the influence that you have as an economy, as an currency, with us. Financial debt, you have pretty good financial debt here in Mexico. Get along, it's pretty complicated. It's not a thing that you can do, for example, in 2 3 days. It's pretty complicated here in Mexico to make transactions on the financial side. Giving and taking loans is pretty hard in Mexico. We also have another issue is that um, our our justice system here in Mexico is not efficient enough, and that's why we have these overregulated institutions or overregulated industries. It's because Mexican authority tries to avoid that someone does anything wrong instead of trying to attack the ones that actually are making some things that are not that are not following the laws. So that is one issue that we have. For example, here in Mexico, if I have a default on a credit, I'm going to last about 2 years in trying to fight to the client that he repays me, or that I can go in and try to recover the money that we have lent to them, because the justice system is pretty slow, it's pretty inefficient. We don't have judges that are focused on what we are doing, and you see not only that issues on on the financial system. You also see that one on the commercial side, on the whatever side that you wanted to see. So that is one of the issues that we have here in Mexico. And the regulatory structure is more fragmented in the US. Here in Mexico, that is, for example, the issue that we have with CNBB, with the Mexican SEC, because the Mexican SEC needs to regulate about 4,000, 5,000 companies, but not on the security side, or the security exchange side, but rather on the activity side. So that is an important issue because they need to see all the operations that they have. Also, what CNBB needs to do is to try to check all of these companies. They don't have a lot of hands. Since the last administration that we have, uh, there is like a tendency with this new party, not new because it's the second administration, the federal administration, that they are in power, but they have this like way to see to try to reduce expenses as possible as they can. And one of the things that they do is that they all the budget that CNBB had, they took it from them, and they need to raise money with fines. That is another thing that happened. What government tells, for example, to CNBV is that you need to go after the ones that are making things that are not in laws, that are doing things in the wrong manner, and find them, because that is the way in which you are going to have any kind of money, because budget, it's no way you are going to be able to have budget. So that is another important thing that happened. A lot of persons, sorry, a lot of people that we have working on CNBB that were very skilled on what they were doing. They went out from CNBB. They are in other parts working. They opened their own financial institutions. They were made partners on whatever firm of laws or accounting or whatever. And also that it's also that phenomenon that happens to have this influence on these decisions that are more slow, that authority doesn't know how to do things. I have been in situations in which I need to explain to the authority what the law is saying, because they don't know how to translate what is in the law. So that is one of the main issues that we have here in Mexico. It's an issue that we have been working on them in the last, I don't know, 2 to 3 years, because it's a pretty big issue that is going to it's evolving into a pretty huge hazard. And only for capital markets comparison, what I mentioned to you is that we have two stock exchanges, Bolsa Mexicana de Valores and Viva. You have New York Stock Exchange, Nasdaq as the principal ones. Uh, we raise a lot of debt. That is our specialty, as I mentioned to you, is to have this financial market. But in Mexico, we don't tend to do a lot of stock market or IPOs in Mexico. We also have the financial stability mechanism, as the one that I mentioned to you. IPAP is the deposit insurance. The name, because that is an acronym, the name is going to be Institución de Protección al Ahorro Bancario, which will be translated to Institution of Banking Saving Protections. Yes, I think that is going to be the translation, the direct translation. Um, It's the same as the FDIC. It's also banking supervision. In Mexico, we have minimal levels of equity that you need to have in order to operate a bank, which is on the order of 8.5%. If one of the banks go below that level, what happens here in Mexico is that authorities go and try to seize the bank in order to try to secure all the deposit savers, or all the deposit that they were on the bank, to try to mitigate the issue. As I mentioned to you, we only had two banks on the last, I think, 10, 20 years that it it went with this issue, with the bankruptcy issue, with the liquidity issue. In Mexico, the banking system actually is, for me, is a pretty good one, is a pretty strong one. Uh, and because CNBB, as I mentioned to you, because they don't have a lot of work to do on the capital market side, they do a lot of work on banking side, because first of all, that's where the money comes from to have budget for the CNBB, because there are a lot of fines that goes from CNBB to the banking system. It's pretty common to see that they are going fine over fine over fine over fine on the banking system, because they have to take the money from one place, and that is the natural place in which they have. So they are regulated, they are pretty well regulated. So the banking system is pretty strong because of this. And in the conclusion, we have some similarities. I think I have known some financial systems in Latin America. I remember Colombia. I also remember Chile. Um, I also remember Argentina financial system from some things that I made with private equity. But from what I have seen is that the one that is more close for from what you have is the Mexican system, the Mexican financial system. We have a lot of persons of people that go and raise money in the US. We have a lot of people that go onto the university system that you have in the US, and they bring a lot of the common practices that you have in the US, and also a lot of regulations. And from the last 20, 25, maybe 30 years, almost all the ministries of finance and almost all the persons of the high level of supervision on the Mexican system are, or at least they have an undergrad level in the US. They have uh, maybe also master degrees in the US. They have work in the US. So you have seen that that is a tendency that we have here in Mexico to try to copy the things that you have in the US, try to bring them to Mexico and just to tropicalize that ones because we have seen that a lot of things that you have in the US work with you. So we try to think or tend to think that it's going to happen the same thing here in Mexico. So it's more likely it's the way in which if you wanted to try to have only one idea of this class is that we have this not issue but this phenomenon with the American financial system. We try to copy a lot of the things that you do. So whenever there is another new uh, invention or a new figure or a new reform or whatever on the laws, on the financial laws, we are going to try to copy them. We're going to study them and try to copy them. And that is a pretty common thing. So I think from this presentation is all the things that I have to tell to you. I don't know if there is any question regarding all these presentations. Do you have any comment on this one?
Anybody have any questions for Professor Carlos? Don't be shy. Couple of things, Carlos. So the United States is celebrating 250th anniversary this summer, and we've had a lot of bumps in the road as we've tried to develop this financial system. So I can understand why you would copy it, but especially the Federal Reserve over the last 5 or 6 years, it's been certainly not, they certainly have a lot of missteps. So copying our Federal Reserve at this point might be a little dicey, but I think when you, as you say, when you compare the two systems, there's a lot of similarities. I think the critical mass is the main difference, just whether it's number of companies on the New York Stock Exchange, on NASDAQ. And we've got a lot of bond traders and stock brokers on the over-the-counter market that trade stock shares in smaller companies that can't be listed on the New York Stock Exchange or can't be listed on NASDAQ. So, and the other thing the other main difference I see from your presentation is when you're talking about the derivative markets. So, we have a lot of individuals in the United States, especially in the production community, that rely on the derivative markets, whether it's options or futures, to lay off price risk. So, and I'll just take Burger King. I was offered a job at Burger King when I first got out of graduate school, and my job was going to be pricing hamburger and going to be using futures and options market to lay off price risk just for the hamburger side of Burger King. So you just see a lot of that in the United States. Plus, we've got a lot of, especially a younger population that likes to gamble, and a lot of them view the futures and options market as a way to make some quick bucks, and some do very well at it, and some not so well. And as I talk to your kids, you got to understand that any short-term investments in the market, it's a zero-sum game. For every winner, there's a loser, and as long as you understand that, you'll be okay. But again, I really appreciate your presentation. I thought it at least brought home to me some of the differences and some of the similarities between the two financial markets. I'll ask one more time. Any of the students have any questions? They're a quiet bunch today. If not, really appreciate your presentation. I sent you the list of names on the teams, and as soon as
Yes.
we get your email addresses for your kids, we'll get everybody started on that.
Yes, tomorrow I will have class with them. I will ask them their emails. Maybe we can go after this app that we have. Well, that they were mentioned to you to try to make this the working teams that we were thinking about.
Yeah.
But let me see tomorrow. I think the groups are already formed, which is a pretty good advantage. We also have at least like the main idea of what is going to be the project. So just let me speak with my students tomorrow, and I will bring you with the detail on the email, and we can start right now to work on the project. I think it's going to be a pretty small project, but but it's going to bring a lot of value to your students and my students. So thanks to you to receiving me at least virtually on this class. It's the first time that I giving classes to an American college university, so it's pretty good, and it was a pretty good experience. So thanks to all of you that you were connected. And if you have any kind of questions, you can ask Robert if we needed to have maybe a second session or just answer that questions. I'm eager to help to you on whatever issue that you have or whatever comment you can bring to me.
Okay, thanks for the presentation, and we will. I'm going to meet with my kids on Monday to go over kind of the parameters and how we're going to proceed and get these meetings started with your kids and get the ball rolling.
Yep, got
Okay.
it.
Thanks,
Okay,
everybody.
thanks.
And
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Professor Carlos. Thank you,
Thank
Professor
you.
Pelli.
Bye.
Bye-bye.